My husband's body wasn't even cold when his brother asked me about the house. I was still in my funeral dress, sitting in our front room with cold tea untouched on the side table, when Charles leaned in and whispered, "Did he ever change the deed?" I looked at him like he'd spoken another language. He tapped his temple, as if that would help me understand. "You know, in case you ever need help managing things now." My husband had been in the ground less than 5 hours. I didn't cry at the funeral. Everyone thought I was in shock, maybe even numb with grief. But the truth was, I felt nothing. I stood next to the casket, accepted cold hands and insincere murmurs. "He was such a strong man. He adored you. You must be devastated," and nodded like a woman playing her part. But I wasn't devastated. I was free. I just didn't know it yet. That evening, when everyone was gone and the quiet came crashing in, I walked the length of the house like a stranger. Same rugs, same furniture. But it felt different. Hollow, almost. I was still in that black dress. I hadn't eaten since morning, and my feet took me to the door I never dared touch in 52 years of marriage. His office. It had always been locked. Always. I used to think it was because of medical files and patient confidentiality. That's what he told me, back when I still believed things. But even after he retired, the door stayed locked. He'd go in after dinner, stay for hours. Sometimes I heard him talking to himself. Once, when I asked what he was working on, he said, "You wouldn't understand. Don't fuss." I stood in front of that door now. It was a plain wooden thing, dark mahogany, with a brass handle. Nothing remarkable, except that it had been the only part of this house that didn't belong to me. I pressed my hand against it. Cool to the touch. Locked, of course. I could almost hear his voice behind me. "That's not for you." How many times had he said that? About his work, his papers, his thoughts. And now he was dead. The next morning, I called a locksmith. I didn't ask Charles. I didn't tell my children. Just found a name online and scheduled an appointment. The man came that afternoon. He was in his 40s, polite, didn't ask questions. Took him 15 minutes. "The lock's old," he said. "Hadn't been changed in years." Of course it hadn't. Control doesn't evolve. It calcifies. When the door finally creaked open, the smell hit me first. Not rot or mildew, just age. Dust, leather, something else I couldn't place. The room was immaculate. A large oak desk, clean and cleared, bookshelves lining the walls filled with binders and thick legal pads, a single lamp, a leather chair, nothing out of place. Nothing, until you looked closer. He had labeled everything, every shelf, every binder. My name appeared again and again. I didn't go further. Not yet. I stood there, hand still on the doorknob, staring into a space that had always been forbidden. And now it was mine. But it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a challenge, or maybe a dare. And I wasn't ready. Not that night. So I closed the door, but didn't lock it. I left it slightly ajar, like a wound breathing in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of grief, not because of fear, but because of the door. I kept thinking it would creak open on its own, that some memory, or ghost, would crawl out from that room and sit on the edge of my bed like it used to be him. But nothing came, just silence, and the occasional tick of the hallway clock. By morning, I was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones. I made tea but forgot to drink it. I stood in front of the mirror in my robe and barely recognized the woman there. Hair like melted silver, thin lips pressed together, a tired defiance in the eyes. I hadn't felt like someone in control of her life in years, maybe ever. By noon, I gave in. I walked back down the hallway and pushed the door open all the way. The air inside hadn't changed. Neither had the smell. Old paper, furniture polish, something medicinal underneath. I stepped in slowly, almost respectfully, like I was entering someone else's grave. The desk was the first thing I approached. It was heavy, walnut, well kept. A glass paperweight sat in the center. Underneath it, a cream envelope with my name. Evelyn. Handwritten, neat, familiar. He always had good penmanship, controlled, like the rest of him. I opened it with stiff fingers. No letter, just a list. Typed. Signed. Instructions for Evelyn Grace upon my death. Contact Charles immediately to handle all financial accounts. Do not attempt to access my office. Legal matters will be resolved separately. Continue psychiatric treatment as previously arranged. All decisions regarding the estate to be coordinated through executor. Avoid stress. Focus on routine. Take medications as prescribed. No, I love you. No, thank you for the years. Just tasks, orders, from the grave. I sat down in the leather chair, slowly. Let the paper fall from my hand. It slid to the floor without a sound. He'd been planning this, even now. Still telling me what to do. Still assuming I'd obey. I opened the top drawer of the desk. Neat folders, labeled meticulously. E.g., finances. E.g., medications. E.g., appointments. Row after row, like case files on me. I pulled one at random, inside. Copies of prescriptions I didn't remember agreeing to. Notes in his handwriting. Increase dosage if agitation returns. Dated 5 years ago. What agitation? Another file held letters. My letters. Ones I'd written to my sister, my friend Caroline, even old birthday cards I'd mailed. All of them had been opened, scanned, some with notes in red ink. Concerning tone? Mentioned sleep disturbances. He'd been watching me. Not in the poetic sense, in the clinical, methodical, obsessive sense. The room was a shrine to his control. I moved to the shelves. Every binder was labeled by year, some by month. E.g., Behavior Log 2013. E.g., Schedule Monitoring 2016. I pulled one. Inside, typed notes. June 3rd. Evelyn stayed out longer than usual at store. Unexplained. September 14th. Refused medication. Became verbally resistant. I pressed my hand to my chest. I felt sick. I had lived this life. I remembered the arguments, the sighs. The way he'd tell me to rest, how he'd pour my water, how I was too tired to join the neighbors. All of it had been orchestrated? I sat down again, my knees weak. The room swayed slightly. This wasn't a husband's study. It was a case file, a case he'd built against me, piece by piece, for years. And I'd never once thought to question it. The afternoon light shifted. The shadows grew long across the floor. The envelope still lay where it had fallen, his handwriting like a scar across the cream paper. He hadn't left me a letter. He'd left me instructions. And for the first time in my life, I had no intention of following a single one of them. The safe was behind the curtain. I hadn't noticed it the first time. Too caught up in the paper trail on the desk. But when I returned the next morning, coffee in hand and a steadier pulse, I saw the edge of a brushed steel door tucked behind the velvet drape. A wall safe, medium-sized, familiar. He used to joke about it. A man needs one secret in his life, he'd say, with that tight half-smile he reserved for parties. I thought he meant old love letters, a bottle of whiskey, something harmless. Not this. I ran my hand over the keypad. 4 digits. No clue. I sat in the chair again. The room was too quiet. Too symmetrical. Every inch felt curated, like I wasn't in a house but inside a thought he'd constructed for me to live in. I looked around. The books on the shelf weren't just for show. He had journals, not medical ones, not quite personal either, just records. One was labeled E.G. Behavioral Notes. I opened it. March 7th, displayed resistance to suggestion about church attendance. Tone sharp. Recommend reinforcing structure. July 12th, increased fatigue. May need vitamin adjustment or check thyroid. Monitor over next 2 weeks. October 2nd, cried during breakfast. Possible hormonal shift? Maintain medication. Watch for escalation. My tears weren't even mine. He turned them into data. Symptoms. I was never Evelyn. I was a subject. I closed the journal and reached for the drawer again. This time I noticed a leather-bound planner, his handwriting meticulous as ever. On the back page, a list of numbers, pins, account codes, random details. One of them was dated with our wedding anniversary, June 17th. I went back to the safe, entered 0617. A click. The door swung open. I expected documents. Maybe a gun. Something sharp, sinister. But it wasn't that. It was worse. Inside were 3 items. A legal envelope marked Last Will and Testament, Confidential. A yellow folder labeled Declaration of Incapacity, e.g., a locked metal box. My hands shook as I reached for the second. The Declaration of Incapacity was a prepared statement, signed, notarized, backdated 6 months ago, claiming I was cognitively declining, that I needed a legal guardian, that I lacked the ability to manage personal affairs. He was going to have me declared incompetent. There were doctors' signatures, familiar names. One had been at our Christmas dinner last year. My face flushed hot. I tasted metal in my mouth. He was setting it up, piece by piece, to take everything, my choices, my house, even my name. The will would come later. I wasn't ready for that yet. I locked the safe again. Slowly, carefully, memorized the code. Then I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the desk. This wasn't just control. It was a coup. He had spent years building a world where my opinions didn't count, my voice was erratic, my emotions were unreliable, and everyone believed him. Because I was quiet. Because I let him speak for both of us. Because I thought love meant trust, even when the walls began to whisper against me. I walked out of that room, closed the door behind me. Didn't lock it, didn't need to. Because now I knew what was inside. And I wasn't the woman he built the case for anymore. He left me a prison, not a home. That thought stayed with me all morning. I walked from room to room. Same curtains I sewed myself in '83, same chipped mug on the counter he hated, same faded rug from our honeymoon trip to Maine. But it all looked different now. I thought, did anything in this house ever truly belong to me? The safe had shaken me, but the yellow folder, that declaration of incapacity, it made me see everything else in a different light. He hadn't just prepared for his death. He had prepared for my disappearance. Quietly, legally, and long before his heart ever failed. I returned to the office with a purpose. This time, I didn't pause in the doorway. I went straight to the bookshelves, my eyes scanning labels. A thin black binder caught my eye. E.g., Legal Overview. Inside were copies of documents I'd signed over the years, but they weren't what I remembered. There was a power of attorney, signed 6 years ago. I had no memory of it. He'd notarized it through Charles. Of course. There was a trust document I didn't understand fully. Something about restricted access, oversight by a family financial advisor. Again, Charles. And a folder of medical records. Diagnoses I'd never heard of. Mild cognitive decline, anxiety, prescription logs, notes from visits I didn't recall. And I started to wonder, had he ever really let me speak for myself in front of a doctor? He drove me to every appointment. Always stayed in the room, interrupted, answered for me. The doctor would ask how I felt. He'd answer, "She's been confused lately, haven't you, Evie?" And I'd nod, because it was easier, because I didn't want to be difficult, because I didn't know I was being erased. I found one more document, this one unsigned but complete. A petition to transfer the house deed to Charles, under the justification that I could no longer manage property decisions. It was dated for last fall. He'd been about to do it, just hadn't gotten there yet. Suddenly, it made sense. Why he never let me handle bills. Why he'd frown when I asked about the mortgage, or the utilities, or the insurance. Why he always insisted we use his guy for everything. I sat down in the desk chair, felt the leather creak beneath me. The same chair he'd sat in for hours every night, planning my erasure. On the lower shelf, I noticed a single manila envelope. It wasn't labeled. I opened it. Inside were photographs. Not of me, not of us, but of my friends. My sister, Caroline, our neighbor Marta. Photographs taken from afar, through windows, from driveways, with notes in his handwriting beneath each. Caroline, potentially disruptive, reinforces old habits. Marta, gossip risk, avoid weekly coffee. Helen, sister, questioned medication, monitor if continues. I dropped the envelope. He'd been tracking not just me, but anyone who might pull me back into the world. I felt a slow fury rise, cold, dense. A kind of anger I hadn't let myself feel in years, not the dramatic kind, not rage, not screaming, just clarity. This man didn't love me. He managed me. He created a system where everyone, the lawyers, the neighbors, even our family doctor, thought I was fragile, unstable, incapable. And the most damning thing, I helped him. Every time I stayed silent. Every time I said, "Oh, he's just protective." Every time I let him speak for me. Every time I told myself it was just age, just marriage, just a phase. I stood slowly, my knees stiff, and walked to the window. Outside, the same lawn I'd trimmed, the same mailbox I'd painted, the same street I'd waved to neighbors from. But the woman standing behind the glass now, she was different. She knew the truth, and she wasn't going to let it stay buried in a locked room. The will was where the real cruelty lived. I waited 3 days before opening it. 3 days of pacing the house, sorting his clothes, pretending to eat, pretending to sleep. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't care what he'd written. But I did. Because everything he'd done so far, every lie, every manipulation, had been perfectly calculated. And this would be his last move. The envelope was thick, stamped with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside, 20 pages of legal phrasing, cold as glass. At first, I didn't understand much, but then, halfway through, the words began to form a pattern. All liquid assets, property, and investments to remain in trust, managed by Charles Grant, until such time as Evelyn Grace is deemed competent to assume control of her affairs. Competent. That word again. Should Evelyn Grace require assisted living, the estate shall cover her expenses, provided her medical guardian approves of the facility. My hand trembled. In the event of mental or physical decline, her care is to be prioritized over discretionary spending. Unused funds revert to the family trust. Revert, a polite word for taken back. He hadn't left me a thing. Not really. I could live in the house but not own it. Spend but not decide. Exist but not act. He'd turned me into a dependent even in death. For a long time I just sat there. The will spread open like a map of everything I'd surrendered without knowing. The silence of the house was deafening. Even the tick of the clock felt like an accusation. When I finally moved, I went to the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back at me. Small, pale, shoulders curved inward. But beneath the frailty, I saw something unfamiliar. An old, slow-burning steadiness. He'd wanted to control me from the grave, but the grave had no say anymore. I took the will, folded it neatly, and slid it into my own file drawer. Then I wrote on the folder in block letters, E.g., evidence. That word gave me a strange comfort. Evidence, proof, not feelings, not memories, facts. Something that could be shown, defended, used. By late afternoon, I'd made a list. People to contact, things to find out. Charles's name was on top. When I called, his tone was cautious, oily. Aunt Evelyn, I've been meaning to reach out. You're the executor, I interrupted. A pause. Yes, I've already started the paperwork. Don't you worry. Don't start anything, I said. Not until I've spoken to an attorney. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Evelyn, your husband's will is very specific. It's for your own protection. We don't want to— Who's we, Charles? Silence. That was all I needed to hear. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Not hollow. Deliberate. Every heartbeat was an instruction. Move. Think. Act. In the drawer beside me, I found my old address book. Dusty, nearly forgotten. Inside, among faded phone numbers, one name stood out. Margaret Hayes, my oldest friend. We hadn't spoken in years. My husband hadn't liked her, said she filled my head with nonsense, which now I realized meant she saw through him. I dialed her number. She answered on the third ring. Evelyn? The same warm, surprised voice. My God, I thought, well, I didn't think you'd ever call. Neither did I said softly. But I've been reading. A pause. Reading what? My husband's mind. Another pause, then a sharp intake of breath. So you finally opened that room. Yes, I whispered. And I'm not finished yet. That night, I didn't close the office door. I let it stay open, spilling lamplight into the hallway like a quiet rebellion. The air didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt mine. The lawyer looked at me like I was someone's confused aunt. He was young, mid-30s maybe. Kind eyes, careful tone, as if afraid I might break into tears or forget where I was. I didn't. I sat across from him in my best navy coat, hair pinned back, papers organized in the folder I labeled E.g. evidence. I handed him the will, then the medical file, then the notarized power of attorney, the trust documents, the fabricated diagnosis. He flipped through them slowly. His eyebrows rose a little, then again. By the third document, his tone shifted. Mrs. Grace, I don't know what to say. Say the truth, I replied. Tell me what he tried to do. He nodded slowly, took a breath. What he did, he said, was attempt to create a legal structure that limited your autonomy without declaring you legally incompetent in court, which means he walked a fine line. He never actually submitted the declaration of incapacity, correct? Not yet, I said. But he planned to. The lawyer, his name was Mr. Rios, leaned back in his chair. He looked thoughtful now, not pitying. Good. The will is structured to trigger those limitations upon death, but everything rests on the assumption that you won't challenge it. He glanced at me, searching. Are you planning to? I didn't come here for comfort, I said quietly. I came for a way out. He smiled, just slightly. Then you've come to the right place. We spent the next hour dissecting the documents, one clause at a time. Mr. Rios explained what the trust did, who controlled it, how to contest it. He told me the will wasn't as airtight as my husband probably thought, not with evidence of manipulation, not with documented patterns of control. I'll need to review everything in detail, he said, but I believe we can challenge this, especially if you can prove he intentionally misled professionals or coerced decisions. I have more, I said. Photographs, journals, logs, medical records I never agreed to. He blinked. Bring it all. The more the better. As I gathered my things, I paused. There's something else, I said. Yes? I don't want just to break the will, I said. I want to be the one who writes the next one. Mr. Rios nodded slowly. We can arrange that. When the trust is dissolved, the assets will return to your control. You'll be free to decide everything. Everything. It echoed in my mind like a bell. As I left his office, the autumn wind whipped at my coat. The sky was sharp and clear. Downtown was noisy, but I felt calm, solid. For the first time in decades, I was handling my own life. Not reacting, not apologizing, not waiting for permission. Just acting. At home, I placed the folder carefully in the drawer. Then I went back into the office. The safe sat quietly behind the curtain, as always. I opened it again. This time, I reached for the locked metal box. It was heavier than I remembered. Inside, jewelry, some old letters, a few family heirlooms, and at the bottom, an envelope marked with my full name. When I opened it, I expected another list. But it wasn't. It was a check, blank, signed, with the full balance of our joint account. And a single sentence written on the card paper beneath it, in case you ever found the door. I stared at it for a long time. So he knew. He knew I'd find it one day. Maybe not soon. Maybe not ever. But some part of him, the part buried deep beneath the cold, must have known I wasn't going to stay caged forever. I folded the check, put it back in the box, and closed it gently. Not because I forgave him, but because I didn't need his permission anymore. The call from Charles came while I was making soup. I let it ring once, twice, then picked it up, wiping my hands on a towel. He didn't waste time. Aunt Evelyn, he said. Too warm, too smooth. I was surprised to hear from the attorney this morning. You didn't tell me you'd retained counsel. I stirred the pot. You didn't tell me you planned to run my estate. A pause. Your husband trusted me. He named me executor for a reason. Yes, because he knew I wouldn't fight. He was wrong. Another pause. Longer this time. I imagined him frowning, calculating how much patience this conversation was worth. You don't have to be hostile, he said finally. We're family. I'm only trying to make sure you're taken care of. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Taken care of, I repeated. Charles, I've been taken care of for 50 years. It nearly killed me. His tone tightened. You're not thinking clearly. There's a reason the documents include oversight. Uncle Thomas was concerned about my mind, I cut in. Funny. Every doctor I've seen in the last year says it's sharp as ever. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Since none of those records are in your files. I heard him inhale, frustrated. Then a shift. Look, he said, switching to sympathy, the condescending kind. You're grieving, I get it. But overturning a trust, contesting a will, it's going to cost time and money. If you just let me handle things, your name's not on anything anymore, I said. I've revoked your access. I've filed the paperwork. And I've hired someone smarter than both of us. Silence. Then, coldly, you'll regret this. You don't know how hard this gets. I didn't flinch. You don't know how hard it's already been. I hung up. My hands shook as I set the phone down, but not from fear. It was something else. Adrenaline, maybe. That rush of saying what should have been said years ago, of not flinching, of not apologizing for being awake. The next morning, Mr. Rios called with updates. We've filed the motion to freeze the trust, he said. Your nephew can't make any moves until the hearing. We'll start preparing for contestation next. What happens if we win? I asked. You gain full legal and financial independence, control of the estate, the house, everything. Everything. There was that word again. That afternoon, I opened the office windows. First time in years. Let the air in, let the dust out. I took down the curtains, the heavy ones he'd insisted on, and threw them in a garbage bag. Then I pulled the photographs off the wall. His degrees, his awards, all framed like declarations of power. I wrapped them in old towels and boxed them, put the box in the garage, not out of hatred, out of space, because I needed room to breathe. In the corner of the office sat a filing cabinet I hadn't dared open yet. It looked ordinary, brown, dented. But something in me knew it mattered. I forced the drawer. Inside, more files. Folders labeled with initials. Women's names I didn't recognize. Their addresses, birth dates. My breath caught. One folder, M. Hayes, had photographs of Margaret, my friend. The one I'd just reconnected with. Notes in his handwriting. Persistent influence. Discouraged Evelyn from routine. Advised therapy cessation. He'd documented her like a threat. Another file. See Franklin. Caroline, my friend from church. She stopped calling years ago. I thought life just got in the way. Observed repeated mention of freedom, potential destabilizing influence. I sat down slowly. He hadn't just watched me. He'd monitored anyone who reminded me who I was. He knew. He knew all along that I was still in there, still whole, still dangerous to his design. That's why he worked so hard to convince the world I was weak, because he was afraid. And he was right to be. Margaret cried when I showed her the folder with her name on it. Not out of fear, not from shock. Just a quiet, old grief. The kind that says I knew, but I let it go. We sat in her sunlit kitchen, 2 cups of tea between us, the file open on the table. She turned each page slowly, notes in his handwriting, surveillance dates, a typed memo he'd written to himself. Margaret remains a disruptive factor. Recommends against contact. Escalate narrative of forgetfulness if needed. Narrative. He'd built a story about me, and about anyone who tried to reach me. I always wondered, Margaret said softly, why the last time I called you were so dull, hollow, like you were underwater. I looked at her hands, still strong, still her. Because I was. She closed the file. And now? Now I'm breathing again. We talked for hours. Not just about the documents, or the will, or Charles, but about the years in between, the quietness that settled into me, The way I stopped going to book clubs, stopped meeting her for lunch, stopped laughing with my whole face. "I thought maybe you were sick," she said. "Or depressed." "I was managed," I said. She reached across the table and took my hand. "You're not alone, Evelyn." It took everything in me not to cry. Not because I was sad, but because I'd forgotten how it felt to be believed. When I got home that afternoon, a letter was waiting in the mailbox. Thick envelope, no return address. My name written in the handwriting I'd lived with for most of my life. I opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside, one sheet of paper. "You are lost without guidance. Don't destroy what little you still have. Stop this now, or the world will see what I always saw." No signature. But I didn't need one. The language was familiar, tight, condescending, full of veiled threats and false concern. He had written it before he died. I knew that in my bones. He'd left it for Charles or someone else to send if I stepped out of line, like a posthumous slap. But it didn't land. Not anymore. I folded the paper once and placed it in the fireplace. It caught quickly, burned silently. And in the flicker of its death, I said aloud, "For no one, and for everyone, you don't get to tell my story anymore." That night, I pulled a box out of the closet. The one with old photo albums, letters, bits of who I'd been before him. Before I bent my spine to fit the shape he needed, there I was, on a beach, laughing. Paint on my hands in the kitchen. Margaret and I in ridiculous hats. Caroline and me dancing on her back porch. That woman was still in there. She'd just been buried under paperwork and prescriptions and 1,000 little cuts called concern. I stayed up until morning, writing. Not a diary, not a confession, a plan. For every document he filed against me, I'd write a truth. For every lie he left behind, I'd plant something living. And when the time came, when court arrived, when decisions were made, I wouldn't just bring evidence. I'd bring me. Charles showed up on my porch 3 days later, uninvited. It was early evening. I'd just poured myself a glass of wine. The first in years that didn't feel like a secret. The knock was hard, hurried. I opened the door slowly. He stood there in a suit, sleeves wrinkled, hair out of place. He looked like a man unraveling. "I need to speak with you," he said, not even trying to smile. "Then speak," I answered, not moving from the doorway. "Inside." "No." He glanced around as if worried the neighbors might see him. "Fine," he muttered. "You've made this very complicated, Aunt Evelyn." "You mean I've interrupted your inheritance?" His jaw tightened. "That's not what this is about." "No? Then tell me what it's about." He hesitated, just for a second. Then he pulled a folded sheet from his coat pocket and held it out. I didn't take it. "Your husband gave this to me a month before he died," Charles said. "Instructions? Contingency plans. He wanted everything handled with dignity, with respect for your condition." "My condition," I repeated flatly. He went on. "He feared you'd do something irrational, that you'd lash out in confusion. We were trying to protect you. By taking away my home? It's in the trust," he snapped. "The law." "I've seen the law," I cut in, "and I've hired someone who actually respects it." He shifted again, sweat forming at his temple. "You're going to lose, Evelyn," he said, low and mean. "You're going to burn through the estate fighting this, and in the end, you'll still be alone." I leaned against the doorframe, calm as I've ever been. "I've been alone for years, Charles. You just didn't notice because I was polite about it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. That was always the problem with men like him. They only understood power when it looked like theirs. I smiled. You can leave now. He didn't move. Or I can call the lawyer and tell him you're harassing me on my own property. That got him. He turned, muttering something under his breath, and stalked down the porch steps. His car, sleek and black, peeled away a little too fast. I stood in the doorway until the taillights disappeared. Then I closed the door. Not gently. That night, I added another page to my file. A summary of the visit, word for word. I knew how these men operated. They'd call it concern. They'd say I was escalating. They'd try to reframe my resistance as instability. But I was building my own record now. The next morning, I met with Mr. Rios again. We went over every clause in the trust, every inconsistency in the medical reports, every witness statement I'd begun collecting. From Margaret, from Caroline, even from the pharmacist who remembered my husband picking up prescriptions under his name, not mine. You're doing better than most, Mr. Rios said, smiling. Most people don't have the clarity you do. I wasn't allowed to have clarity, I said. That was the whole point. He nodded. As I left his office, I passed a mirror in the hallway, caught a glimpse of myself. Hair a little windblown, cheeks pink from walking, shoulders straight. I looked real, not invisible, not someone's wife, not a fading memory in a file. Just a woman with fire in her chest and a name she wasn't letting anyone rewrite. I used to think silence was safe. Now I know. It's where people disappear. Not all at once. Not with a bang. But slowly. So gently. They don't even notice they're gone. I'd been disappearing for years. One prescription at a time. One canceled lunch. One condescending comment. You don't need to worry about that, sweetheart. I'll handle it. You rest. No need to overthink. Like I was a flickering light someone was quietly unscrewing, until I wasn't shining at all. But 10 days after Charles stood on my porch, trying to scare me into compliance, I stood in a notary's office and signed my own name, clearly, steadily, on a power of attorney revocation form. The woman behind the counter looked up. She must have been my granddaughter's age, 22, maybe 25. But she looked at me like I was something rare. Mrs. Grace, she said, if more people came in like you. I didn't ask her to finish. I walked out of that building taller than I'd walked in. The next task on my list was harder, personal. I took the bus. Not because I had to, but because I hadn't done it in years. I needed the reminder of who I used to be. The one who knew how to navigate life without asking for help or permission or forgiveness. I rode into the city and climbed 3 flights of stairs in an old building that smelled like coffee and mildew and old linoleum. Caroline answered her door barefoot, holding a dish towel. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Evie? That name. I hadn't heard it in a decade. Are you going to let me in? I said gently. Or are we going to pretend the last 10 years didn't happen? She let me in. No questions. The apartment was warm. Light through the kitchen window hit her counter like honey. I sat on a wooden stool while she poured 2 cups of coffee. We didn't talk about the lost years right away. We talked about her dog, the neighbor's new boyfriend, the fact that my hair looked better short. You should have done that years ago, she said, smirking. Then I told her everything. The room went quiet. She didn't interrupt, just held her cup in both hands, still as stone. When I finished, she blinked. Evelyn, she said, I had no idea. I know. I thought you just faded. I did, I said. He made sure of it. She set her coffee down and reached across the table. I'm so goddamn sorry. We stayed that way, hand over hand, for a long time. Then she said something I hadn't expected. I want to write a statement about what he said to me the last time we spoke. You remember that? I never forgot. That evening, she emailed it to me. A short, clear paragraph describing how my husband had called her once, back when we still saw each other regularly, told her that I was under a lot of stress, that I struggled with memory, that I often misunderstood things, and that he was doing his best to protect me, that she should back off for my safety. And so she did, because she trusted him, because she didn't want to make things worse, because she thought maybe he was telling the truth. I read it 4 times, then printed it, filed it under supporting evidence, character defamation. I sent a copy to Mr. Rios. He called within the hour. This is excellent, he said. This shows intent, shows a pattern. If we get 2 more like this, I think the judge will have no choice but to at least partially dissolve the trust. But I don't want part, I said. I want the whole damn thing burned. He didn't laugh, neither did I. That night, I pulled a box out of the closet I hadn't touched since 1998. Inside were letters, real ones, ink, envelopes, stamps, letters I'd written to myself once a year, every New Year's Eve, back when I still believed in becoming someone better. I opened the last one. It said, I hope you haven't forgotten what it felt like to laugh with your mouth open. I hope you're still reading, still walking fast, still making lists, still refusing to apologize for your voice, still alive in the ways that matter. I held that paper to my chest. No tears came, only heat, only something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of return. She found the papers under a stack of magazines, not because she was snooping, but because she was bored. My granddaughter Nora had been staying the weekend, and after an hour of my home-baked scones and a walk around the garden, she started poking through my old photo albums and dusty bookshelves as only a 17-year-old can, curious without fear. Grandma, she called from the study. Who's C. Franklin? I was in the kitchen, rinsing teacups. I froze. Where did you see that name? I asked, calmly, too calmly. There's a file, she said, with lots of papers in your handwriting and some in someone else's. It says things like monitor conversation, and it has a photo. A woman in a blue scarf? Caroline. I dried my hands and walked slowly toward her. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, the file opened on the rug, one page in her hand. She looked up at me, and for a second, just a second, I saw the same look in her eyes I used to see in the mirror. Confusion, hurt, disbelief. I sat down beside her. The joints in my knees cracked as I folded myself beside the mess of papers. Put that down, sweetheart, I said gently. I'll tell you everything. She did, and I did. For the first time, out loud, without tidying the story to make it less shameful, without excusing him, without softening the edges. I told her about the office, the safe, the fake diagnosis, the friends he tried to cut off, the money he kept from me, the documents that said I was incompetent, the visits I wasn't allowed to make, the questions I was trained not to ask. She listened, silent, wide-eyed. Why would he do that? She whispered. Because he needed me to be smaller than him, I said. And when I wasn't, he found ways to make it look like I was. Nora nodded slowly. That's abuse. I blinked. The word landed like a gavel. Yes, I said finally. It is. She gathered the papers and placed them gently back in the folder. Then she looked me in the eye. And this child, this teenager with her black painted nails and sharp brain and no tolerance for lies, said, "He was wrong about you." And just like that, something broke open in me. Something I didn't know was still locked. Later that night, after she'd gone to sleep in the guest room, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. At the top, I wrote, "Testimony, Nora Grace. Witness to documents and emotional impact." I described the moment, her reaction, her words, not because I needed more evidence for court, though Mr. Rios would be pleased, but because it mattered. It mattered that someone young, someone untouched by the narrative my husband had spun, saw me clearly, without filters, without history clouding her eyes. It meant the truth wasn't just mine anymore. The next morning, Nora left early for a school project. But before she did, she hugged me tighter than usual. "Don't let them win, Grandma," she said. I smiled. I don't plan to. When she was gone, I stood in the study and looked around. For decades, this room had been his thoughts, his secrets, his power. Now, it was where my granddaughter called out the word abuse like a lit match in a dark room. Now, it was mine. I sat at the desk, opened the laptop, one he never used, and created a new folder. I named it Restoration, and I began uploading every file, every photograph, every note. I wasn't just preparing for court anymore. I was preparing to rebuild. On my terms. The new lawyer didn't speak right away. She sat behind a wide oak desk, glasses perched low, gray hair twisted into a bun that looked like it had never once come undone. Her name was Judith Bell. Mr. Rios had recommended her. If you want someone who's calm in a courtroom and deadly in paperwork, she's your woman. She flipped slowly through my folder, page after page, one long painted fingernail tapping the table with each turn. I sat across from her, spine straight, not a drop of fear in me, only waiting. Finally, she looked up. "This isn't just a trust dispute," she said. "This is a full-scale reputational erasure." I nodded. She tapped a paragraph on the will. "He structured it so you'd be paid for obedience, not partnership." He always did. Did anyone ever try to intervene? I smiled faintly. They didn't know they had to. Judith nodded. That's the cruelty of it. People see bruises, they act. But you hide someone's mind, and no one notices. Not right away. She closed the folder. You've built a solid base. Affidavits, logs, misdiagnoses, irregular power of attorney. But there's one more thing that could tip this. Proof of intent. A document or message where he clearly indicates he meant to control you, not help. I have something, I said quietly. I reached into my purse and pulled out the letter, the one Charles had delivered posthumously, the one that said, "Stop this now, or the world will see what I always saw." Judith read it once, then again. Then she smiled. Not kindly. "Oh," she said. "He made our job very easy." We spent the next hour discussing strategy. There would be a preliminary hearing in 3 weeks. She'd petition to suspend Charles's executorship, file a motion to dissolve the trust, submit evidence for financial abuse and coercive control. "Will I have to speak in court?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "but you won't be alone." That night, I sat by the fireplace, folder in my lap, the pages almost warm from my hands. I kept thinking about something Caroline had said in her affidavit. He made everyone believe she was fragile, when really she was the strongest woman in the room. I thought of Nora, looking at those files with fire in her voice, of Margaret saying, "You're not alone," of Mr. Rios telling me, "You're clearer than most clients half your age," of Judith quietly placing the letter in a file labeled admittance. They saw me, and still they weren't half as important as what I saw in myself now. The next morning, I walked into the local library, the one I hadn't visited in 15 years, and asked for the event room. The librarian blinked. "Are you hosting something?" "Yes," I said. "A workshop." She tilted her head. "On what?" I smiled. "Estate clarity and mental manipulation in long marriages." She blinked again. "You mean like financial abuse?" "Yes," I said. "But polite, institutional, the kind no one talks about until it's too late." She stared, then nodded. "We've never had that before." I'm not surprised. I paid the deposit, reserved a date, and left with a stack of flyers under my arm. On the way out, I saw my reflection in the glass of the exit door. Same silver hair, same lined eyes. But something else now, too. A woman who'd been pushed into silence for half a century and chose to speak anyway. A woman who'd stopped waiting to be heard. A woman who didn't need revenge to feel powerful. She just needed her name back. He showed up with a folder, pressed slacks, polished shoes, and a forced calm that reeked of panic. Charles stood on my doorstep again, this time holding a manila file like it was a shield. He didn't ask to come in. He knew I wouldn't let him. "I spoke to your lawyer," he said. "This is getting out of hand." I crossed my arms. "Out of your hands, you mean?" He flinched at that, just barely. "I came to offer a resolution," he said, voice clipped. "A way to avoid court. You don't need that kind of stress, Evelyn." There it was again. The tone, the performance of concern, the subtle suggestion that I couldn't possibly handle what I had already lived through. "I'm fine," I said. "You, on the other hand, look tired." He didn't smile. "I've spoken to the family," he said, adjusting the file in his hands. "If you'll sign a partial concession, relinquish the inheritance claim but keep the house, we'll drop the trust oversight. Let you live comfortably. No court, no headlines. Everyone wins." I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. "You think this is about money?" He hesitated. "Isn't it?" "No," I said flatly. "It's about my name. And the fact that no one, not you, not your uncle, not anyone, gets to erase it." Charles held out the folder. "Please, Evelyn, this is the right way." I didn't take it. "The right way?" I echoed. "He spent years planning to make me disappear. You were going to carry it out, and now you want me to nod along for convenience. It was never personal. It was my life, Charles." He blinked, and for the first time since this began, he looked uncertain, not shaken, not sorry, but unsure, like he couldn't understand how this had turned on him. "You were always quiet," he said. "You never argued. You never—" "Because I was surviving." He looked away. "You all thought I was soft," I said, voice steady. "But I was waiting, watching, gathering. Now I have truth, and you have damage control." He stepped back. The file in his hand drooped slightly, the papers inside beginning to slide. I didn't offer to catch them. "You still have time," he said quietly, "to make this simple." I looked him in the eye. "So do you." He turned, folder clutched to his chest like a wounded thing, and left without another word. When the door closed behind me, I locked it, not out of fear, out of clarity. Later that afternoon, Mr. Rios called. "Just heard from their legal team," he said. "They're getting nervous. Offered a settlement." "I don't want a settlement," I said. "I told them as much." He paused, then added, "You're making waves." "I'm making records," I corrected. The next morning, I stood in front of a group of 8 women at the library. 3 widows, 2 divorcees, 1 social worker, 1 daughter, and 1 woman who simply said, "I don't know why I came, but I think I was supposed to." I held up a photo of the will, the forged diagnosis, the power of attorney he'd filed without my knowledge. Then I spoke about control that wears a smile, about marriages where silence is rewarded and questions are punished, about being groomed into helplessness with praise and stripped of power in the name of protection. Every face in the room nodded. Some cried. One woman whispered, "He does that too." When I finished, I said, "If you feel like something is being done to you instead of with you, stop, ask, push, document." Because the paper trail they leave can be the rope you climb out on. The room was quiet. Then one woman clapped. Then another. It wasn't applause like a performance. It was recognition. Afterward, 2 women stayed behind. "I want to talk to your lawyer," one said. The other looked at me with soft eyes and said, "How did you stay so calm through it all?" I smiled. "I didn't," I said. "But I didn't let that stop me either." That night, I sat at my kitchen table and lit a single candle. Not for mourning, for illumination, because I wasn't fighting a man anymore. I was fighting a story, and I was finally writing my own. The court date came with rain, not a storm, nothing dramatic, just a soft, steady drizzle, like the sky was washing off something old. I wore navy, not black. Black would have made it about him. Navy was for strength. Quiet, solid, undeniable. I pinned my hair up myself. No fuss, no trembling hands. Judith met me outside the courthouse. She didn't say much, just nodded once. Inside, the room was small, tidy, fluorescent lights, brown carpet, a clock that ticked a little too loudly. Charles sat at the other table with his lawyer, a tall man with slick hair and the kind of voice that oiled its way through arguments. They didn't look at me, didn't smile, just whispered behind their papers like boys who'd been caught cheating. The judge, a woman in her 60s, called us to order. The hearing wasn't a trial, just the first step. Petition to dissolve the trust, revoke the executor's rights, and return full authority to me. Judith stood first. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She laid out the facts like bricks: forged perception of mental incompetence, manipulative legal documents, absence of a formal medical diagnosis, and intentional control of assets to limit autonomy. Then she presented the evidence, my notes, the files, the declaration of incapacity with its convenient backdate, the medication records, Caroline's affidavit, Nora's observation, the letter he left. "Stop this now, or the world will see what I always saw." Judith read that last line aloud. The room fell into a long, frozen pause. Then it was their turn. Charles's lawyer stood. He used words like confused, fragile, protective intentions, family discretion. He didn't look at me once, because if he had, he would have seen the truth. I was none of those things. When he was done, the judge looked at me. "Mrs. Grace," she said, "do you wish to make a statement?" I stood. No notes, just my voice. I was married to a man who believed love meant control, that if he dressed it up as care, no one would notice the leash. He planned my decline like a retirement package, structured, hidden, tidy. And the worst part is, for a long time, I agreed with him. Not because I was weak, because I was tired, because I thought marriage meant yielding, because I thought silence was respect. I took a breath. But then I opened the door. Another breath. And what I found wasn't love. It was a case file on my life. He had erased me, legally, emotionally, financially, and I didn't even notice. Until I did. And once I did, I couldn't go back. I looked the judge in the eye. I'm not here to be angry. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to take back what was always mine. The judge nodded once, then recessed for deliberation. 30 minutes later, we returned to the courtroom. Her ruling was short, firm. The trust is hereby dissolved. The named executor is removed. All assets, property, and legal authority return to Evelyn Grace. Charles didn't move, not even when the gavel fell. Judith touched my arm gently. "It's done," she said. But it wasn't the gavel or her words that made it real. It was the way I exhaled, like I hadn't breathed in years. Outside, the rain had stopped. The pavement shimmered. I stood at the top of the courthouse steps, bag in hand, no one beside me, and I wasn't lonely. I was whole. I walked down those steps without looking back, because when you leave a cage, you don't stop to memorize the bars. I didn't throw anything out right away. It's tempting, after a victory, to start purging. Clothes, photos, papers, anything that smells like the past. But I knew better. Victory isn't the same as healing. Healing comes slow, quiet. It doesn't march. It lingers. So the house stayed the same for a few days. The same furniture he picked, the same layout, the same heavy curtains in the living room, drawn for energy efficiency, but really just to keep the world out. But then one morning, I opened all the windows. Every single one. I let the air move through like a tide. I watched the curtains sway. I didn't touch a thing, just let the breeze remind the walls what it felt like to be alive. Then I opened the drawer in his office and pulled out the envelope I'd been avoiding. To Evelyn, if she ever finds this. I read it again, slowly. "You're not well, Evie. You haven't been for a long time. You don't see what I see. You twist things, forget things. And I knew one day you'd come for what's mine. So I set this up. Because you weren't safe anymore. Not to yourself. I did this to protect you. I hope you understand." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even cruel. That's what made it worse. It was a man justifying himself in the language of care. A man so convinced of his rightness, he wrote this letter assuming I'd read it in shame. I folded it once, slid it back into the envelope, wrote across the front in black ink. This was never love. Then I sealed it. Not to keep. To bury. That afternoon, I drove to a quiet park just outside town. There's a walking trail there, mostly flat, with old trees and a creek that hums. I used to walk it before he started calling my outings overexerting. I walked it again, letter in hand. At the halfway mark, there's a bench under a crooked oak. I sat there, alone, and read the letter one last time. Then I tore it in half, then again, and again, until the wind carried the pieces out of my lap and into the trees. And just like that, I let it go. Not the memory, not the pain, but the power it had over me. When I got home, I did start throwing things out, not out of spite, out of space. The curtains, the folders. His collection of trophies from medical conferences I was never invited to attend. The recliner he never let me sit in. The file labels with my name like a patient ID. Gone. I kept the records, though, the evidence, neatly boxed. Not as a monument, but as a marker. A reminder of what vigilance looks like. A few weeks later, the workshop at the library doubled in size. Women brought friends, daughters, neighbors. One even brought her husband, said she wanted him to hear what silence sounds like. Judith came to one. She sat in the back, taking notes. I want to start a resource center, I told her after, for women who feel something's off but don't know what. A place to ask questions before it's too late. She nodded. You'd be good at that. I already am, I said. And I believed it. Nora visits every other weekend now. We cook, we laugh, we talk about college. She asked me once, Grandma, do you think he ever really loved you? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth is, I don't know. Maybe he loved the version of me he created. The soft one, the quiet one, the one who didn't ask why. But me? Evelyn Grace? No. I don't think he ever saw her at all. And that used to break my heart. Now, it breaks his legacy. Because I didn't just survive him, I exposed him. Quietly. Completely. I dismantled the system he built with folders and charm and concern. And I did it not with rage, but with truth. I kept a copy of the court ruling in a small frame by my bed. Not because I need proof, because I like remembering the day the silence ended, the day my voice, soft, aged, persistent, became louder than his ghost. If you're reading this, if you're nodding along, then maybe it's your time too. Time to open the locked room. Time to read the papers. Time to tell the truth. Don't wait for someone to rescue you. They will call you angry. They will call you difficult. They will say you're remembering wrong. Let them. Because you know. And now you speak, and we hear you. Like this story? Share it. Someone else might need to know they're not crazy, just controlled.